Thank you, Ranking Member Morelli and members of the committee for participating in today's hearing on the 2022 midterm election in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. So what exactly happened? Let's look back. In 2022, our nation faced a major supply chain crisis, including the paper needed to make ballots. The Committee on House Administration Republicans, the Election Assistance Commission, and several media outlets warned a ballot paper shortage could disrupt the 2022 election. In fact, committee Republicans held a widely attended and covered roundtable on the ballot paper shortage crisis in early 2022. The Elections Assistance Commission encouraged state and local election officials to prepare by ensuring they ordered enough ballots well in advance of the November election. I warned officials in my home state of Wisconsin about the need to prepare. In fact, in July 2022, I spoke with CBS 58, a CBS affiliate in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and said, quote, one of the things is that paper ballots are a pretty unique type of paper. It's not just your average everyday type of paper that you can snag off the shelf, which is good because it provides election integrity, but it's challenging for suppliers, end quote. Unfortunately, for voters in Luzerne County, their elections officials seem to be the only ones who didn't listen to the warnings. In Luzerne County, on Election Day 2022, nearly 1/3 of precincts ran out of paper. In some cases, there were shortages just after the polls opened. This resulted in voters being turned away from the polls and denied their right to vote. When some voters later returned to the polls, they discovered there were still no ballots. Effectively, many polls in Luzerne County were closed for hours on Election Day, and some didn't reopen. In response to the ballot shortage, election officials and voters rushed to stores such as Staples to buy standard copy paper for voters to use for voter-created emergency ballots, something that is truly unbelievable in American elections today. They were then instructed to write out choices on standard 20-pound paper, vote by photocopies of ballots instead of ballot paper, or cast emergency or provisional ballots in place of standard ballots. They had no guarantee that the voting equipment would be able to process these irregular ballots or that their vote would count. The Luzerne County Board of Elections has the authority and responsibility to investigate this election disaster. Yet 6 days after the election, on November 14th, the board voted to send the investigation to the District Attorney Sam Sangudalce. 20 days after the election, on November 28th, the board met and voted not to certify the election because the problems were obvious. Then 2 days later, on November 30th, in a partisan vote following public pressure, 3 Democratic commissioners reversed course and voted to certify the election in spite of the obvious problems. And to date, no official action has been taken in Luzerne County. No report from the district attorney, no report from the Secretary of State, no report from the Luzerne County Board of Elections. There must be accountability. Our committee is focused on figuring out how this happened and ensuring it never happens again. This is all the more important as Pennsylvania prepares for a state election in May and a presidential election next year. In America, every interested and eligible citizen who wants to cast a ballot has the right to do so, and that vote must count in accordance with law. We invited several officials from Luzerne County to come today and answer some very straightforward questions about how this election disaster occurred. They're not here. We also need to learn how they intend to prevent this from happening in the future. It's disappointing they declined our invitation. I hope those officials who refused to come and testify today are watching to hear from voters in Luzerne County whose votes were suppressed due to their negligence. For years, several of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle have claimed that states like Florida and Georgia that have implemented voter integrity laws are suppressing voters. In fact, for 2 years, I've sat through dozens of hearings on this topic. However, they never produced a single voter who wanted to vote and was unable to. But contrast that with today, as we hold a hearing with evidence that voters who wanted to legally vote were turned away from the polls. Today, we're working to bring transparency and accountability to the voters of Luzerne County who were failed by their local election officials. Citizens of Luzerne County deserve to be heard. They have the right to vote. They need answers from those who are elected to serve them. My goal is to provide transparency, to hold those accountable, and to prevent this disaster from ever happening again.